right, problem number one, the Jackson Timberlake Wardrobe Malfunction Company just paid a dividend of $1.45 per share. They intend to grow their dividends at a constant rate, G, of 6% per year. Investors require 11% return. What is their current stock price today? What is the price in 3 years? What's the price 15 years? So this is the constant dividend growth model where G grows at a constant rate. So we're going to use that equation. P0 equals next dividend. The price today equals next dividend over R minus G. D1 being today's dividend just paid times 1 plus G to take it out 1 year over R minus G. Similarly, P3 equals next dividend D4 over R minus G. And P15 is equal to D16 over R minus G. Now, how do I calculate this D4? Well, D4 is dividend paid today times 1 plus the growth rate to the 4th power. And how do I calculate D16? Well, it's the dividend paid today, D0 times 1 plus the growth rate to the 16th power. Alternate way to calculate these where I have a constant growth rate in the dividend, the price at any time t, or price at time 3 is equal to today's price. Once I have it calculated, times 1 plus G to the 3rd. And I can calculate P15 this way, also take today's price times 1 plus G to the 15th if I have today's price already calculated. So price today is $1.45, which is D0, just paid. I know it's D0 because it's just paid. If it said dividend next year, that'd be D1. I wouldn't have to multiply by anything, but since it says just paid, that gives me my D0. So $1.45 times 1.06 takes me out to D1. Divided by R minus G, 0.11 minus 0.06, I get a price today of $30.74 per share. Now, if I want price 3, that's equal to D4 over R minus G. Today's dividend times 1.06 to the 4th over 0.11 minus 0.06, I get a P sub 3 of $36.61. And P15 is D16 over R minus G, $1.45 times 1.06 to the 16th power over 0.11 minus 0.06, I get a price 15 of $73.67. And again, I can check these P3 and P15. P3 I can check by taking P0 of 30.74, multiplying it by 1.06 to the 3rd, and I should have come up with the same answer of $36.61. And for P15, I can take P0, 3074 times 1 plus 0.06 to the 15th power, and I should get that same answer of $73.67. There are your answers to problem 8.1. In problem number 2, Blue Cheese Incorporated next dividend. Next is the key word. Dividend D1 will be $1.89 per share, 5% growth rate. G, stock sells for $38 a share today. P0, current stock price. What is the required rate of return? Well, I break that constant dividend growth equation into 2 pieces and solve for R. I get required return is equal to D1 over P0, also known as dividend yield, plus G, capital gains yield. Those are the 2 components of my required return. So percent R equals $1.89, which is D1, divided by $38, P0 plus G, 0.05. I get a rate of 9.9737%. That is my required return in problem 2. In problem 8.3, using the givens from problem 8.2, I'm going to use the same information. Next dividends, $1.89 a share, 5% growth rate, stock sells for $38. Find the 2 components of required return. Last time we found the required return to be 9.9737. Now give me the 2 pieces of that. So dividend yield is D1 over P0, $1.89 over $38. So I get a dividend yield of 0.049737 or 4.9737%. And for my capital gains yield, it's just my G, 0.05. And those 2 pieces should add up to 9.9737%, and indeed they do. There are your answers to problem number 3. In problem 8.4, we have Stahl Corporation. They will pay a $3.40 dividend next year. They'll increase the dividend at 4.5% per year indefinitely. You require an 11% return on your investment. What's the stock price today? Stock price under the constant dividend growth rate model is D1, next dividend over R minus G. Stock price today is equal to next dividend over R minus G. So since we're given the next dividend next year, we'll will pay next year $3.40. I just plug that right in. No need to multiply by 1 plus G. Divided by R minus G 0.11 minus 0.045. I get a stock price today of $52 and about 31 cents per share. There's your answer to problem number 4. In problem 8.5, we have Keene & Company with maintaining a 4.8% growth rate in their dividends. Dividend yield is 6.9%. What is required return percent R? Required return is equal to two components. Dividend yield, D1 over P0 plus capital gains yield, G. So a very simple problem. I'm given the dividend yield at 6.9%. I'm given the growth rate of 4.8%. I get a percent required return of 11.7% for problem 8.5. In problem 8.6, we have a company stock selling for $59 today. That's P0. The required return is 11%. Total return is equally divided between dividend yield and capital gains yield. What is the current dividend today, D0? So we know that percent R is equal to D1 over P0 plus G, equally split between dividend yield in this case and capital gains yield. So D1 over P0 is 0.055 or 11% divided by 2, and G is 0.055 or 11% divided by 2. So that part becomes very simple, and those are my givens. So therefore, if my D1 over P0 is 0.055, D1 over $59 is 0.055, I can then isolate and calculate D1 at $3.24.5 per share. D1, 59 times 0.055, 3.2450. And then to calculate D0, today's dividend, I take D1 and bring it back to today, dividing it by 1 plus the growth rate. So 324.50 divided by 1.055, I get today's dividend at 3.0758. There are your answers to problem number 6. In problem number 7, Apocalyptica. Corporation pays constant $8.50 dividend. We'll maintain this for 11 years, then stop. So 850, 850, 850, 850, 850 sounds like an annuity to me. 850, 850, and then 0. Goes all the way down to 0. So I'm going to call that wildly fluctuating. I can use the wildly fluctuating stock valuation model. P0 equals D1 over 1 plus R plus D2 over 1 plus R squared plus D3 over 1 plus R Q plus DT over 1 plus RT plus P sub T over 1 plus R to the T. Since P11 is equal to D12, there is no D12, so I scratch this P sub 11 goes to 0 because D12 is 0 and all future dividends are 0. So this becomes just an annuity formula. I can do it this way. I can go 850 over 1.12, 850 over 1.12 squared, 850 over 1.12 cubed, all the way out to 850 over 1.12 to the 11th. Or I can realize that's an annuity and plug it into the annuity present value formula. Price of the stock today is equal to the 850 times 1 minus 1 over 1 plus R, 1.12 to the T, 11 over 0.12. I get an answer of $50.47 per share for problem number 7. In problem number 8, Lane Inc. has preferred stock issued that pays $4.75 a share dividend in perpetuity. Stock sells for $93 a share. What is their required return? Since it says in perpetuity, I can use the zero growth stock equation, which means the same stock dividend each and every year. Price today equals constant dividend over R, similar to the present value of perpetuity equation we learned earlier, equal to C over R. It takes the same form. So the price of the stock today is $93. The dividend, which is constant, is $4.75. And divided by percent R, I can use that to solve for R, and I get 5.1075% is your answer to problem number 8. In problem 8.9, we have red, yellow, and blue corporations. Each will pay a dividend of $2.65 per share next year. Will pay next year, D1. The required returns are 8%, 11%, and 14% for these three companies, respectively. What is the stock price for each company if the growth rate, G, in the dividend is plus 5% per year? The constant dividend growth rate equation, price today is equal to D1 over R minus G, is used for all three problems. So for red, I take $2.65 D1 divided by the growth rate 0.08 minus 0.05, the required return, minus growth rate of 0.05, and I get a share price of $88.33 per share. For yellow corp, I take the dividend, next dividend D1 265 divided by their required return of 11% minus 0.05, and I get a stock price of $44.17 per share. And for blue corp, today's stock price is equal to D1 of 265 divided by required return of 14% minus 0.05, and I get a stock price of $29.44 per share. You can see very quickly the next question is what happens as the required return goes up for each of these companies. Well, it's simple. You're dividing by a larger denominator, and therefore your stock price goes down as the required return goes up. There are your answers to problem number 9. In problem number 10, Schenkel has 400,000 shares outstanding. Their stock sells for $48 a share. They are in straight voting mode. What will it cost you to buy a seat on the Schenkel Corporation Board of Directors? You need 50% of the shares plus one share, and that's because it's straight voting. So if you have one more share than everyone else, you're in. 50% of 400,000 shares is 200,000 shares, plus one share is 200,000 and one share, times $48 a share, 9.600048. 9.600048, $9.6 million roughly, to buy yourself a seat on the board of Schenkel. That's your answer to problem number 10. In problem number 11, Schenkel now uses cumulative voting versus straight voting in the last problem. 4 seats are open on the board of directors. What's the cost of the seat on the board now? It's a little bit different. This allows minority participation on the board of directors. So equation is 1 over n plus 1% of the total shares plus one share. And it's the number of directors to be elected. So 4 directors to be elected, 1 over 4 plus 1 is 1/5, or 20% of the shares. 20% of 400,000 is 80,000 shares plus one share. I need one more. As in the Smith & Jones example, so 80,001 shares at $48 a share. It will cost me $3840048 under cumulative voting to buy a seat on the board of directors. Now this is much less than what it would cost the 9.6 million we showed in the last problem under straight voting. 3840048 under cumulative voting is your answer to problem number 11. In problem number 12, we have Sleeping Flower Company, which has earnings of earnings per share of $1.75 a share. And their price to earnings ratio is 18. What 18 times? What's their stock price? What would the stock price be if their PE ratio was 21 times earnings? So the equation is price per share is equal to earnings per share times price earnings ratio. And certainly I can cancel these out and get price per share. So first example, I take $1.75 in earnings per share times 18 times. I get a stock price of $31.50 per share. If the PE ratio goes up to 21, I take $1.75 in earnings per share times a PE of 21 times, I get $36.75 per share. There are your answers to problem number 12. And problem number 13, Twitter Me has sales of $1.2 million. Price to sales ratio is 5.2 times. What is an appropriate stock price if there are 130,000 shares outstanding? What if their price to sales ratio is 4.6 times? So we'll do 2 stock price cases. Stock price is equal to sales per share times price to sales ratio. So first of all, we'll calculate sales per share. We'll take 1.2 million in sales divided by 130,000 shares. We'll multiply that by 5.2 price to sales ratio, and I get $48 per share. $48 per share is your first answer. Now, if the price to sales ratio goes up to 4.6 times, I take my sales per share, multiply that by 4.6, and I get a stock price of $42.46 per share. There are your answers to problem number 13. In problem number 14, Great Pumpkin Farms just paid dividend of $3.20 a share. The growth rate in dividends is 5% per year. And then investors want 15% return for required return for 3 years, 13% for the next 3 years, then 11% thereafter. What is the current stock price? In this case, I'm going to use a wildly fluctuating stock valuation model or general stock valuation model because the R fluctuates wildly in this problem. So I have no choice but to use this more complex equation. P0 is D1 over 1 plus R, D2 over 1 plus R squared, D3 over 1 plus R cubed plus P3 over 1 plus R cubed. But first I have to go out to when the last R changes out at time 6, and I calculate P6. P6 is equal to D7 over R minus G. So you have to calculate D7 first and divide that by R minus G to get P6, and then you put it into a formula similar to this for P3. P3 will equal D4 over 1 plus R plus D5 over 1 plus R squared plus D6 over 1 plus R cubed plus P6 over 1 plus R cubed. Let me go over that again. P3 will equal D4 over 1 plus R plus D5 over 1 plus R squared plus D6 over 1 plus R cubed plus P6 over 1 plus R cubed. And that's where you'll put in that P6 right there. And then finally you'll calculate P0 according to this formula exactly, inserting the P3 in here that you just calculated. A very complex problem. Give it a try. In problem number 19, we have Fry Corporation growing dividends 30% a year for 3 years, 20% for 1 year, and then 6% per year thereafter. So they have 3 growth rates in their dividends. First 30% for 3, 20% for the 4th year, and then 6% thereafter. So after year 5 and after, we're going to grow the rates at 6%. Required return is 10% throughout, and the stock price $76 a share. What is the D1? Next dividend. So again, we have wildly fluctuating growth rates. In this case, we're going to use a wildly fluctuating stock valuation model or the general stock valuation model. Supernormal, the author calls it. So there are 3 names for this one. This is the equation we're going to use. And we need to find, I think the easiest way to do it is find D0 first and then multiply by 1 plus G1 to get D1. First of all, find P4. So I go out to the 5th year when things finally change. So it's 30% for 3 years, 20% growth in the 4th year, and then 6% in the 5th year. So from the 5th year, I step back 1 year and calculate the 4th year price, P4, and I do that in terms of D0. So try and state that in terms of D0. First of all, P4 is equal to D5, next dividend, over R minus G. And then I can state D5 in terms of D0. So do that and you'll get P4. And then next I'm going to calculate P0 in terms of D0. And then I'll calculate D1 equals D0 times 1 plus G1, which is that first growth rate. Try this one. It's a challenging problem. Give it a shot.